Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast on how SaaS companies can market to DTC brands in the US. I have Ronak Shah with me, who is a DTC founder himself and also helps SaaS companies in this journey. I'll let Ron give a brief introduction about himself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, Sachin. Guys, my name is Ron Shah, and I am co-founder of a brand called Obvi. We're a women's collagen and supplement brand, and then we also I co-founded a media company called Chew on This, which helps SaaS companies connect with brand founders and brands through the use of media.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Ron. Broadly, for the podcast today, we're going to talk about how SaaS companies, more specifically Indian SaaS companies, can actually market to DTC brands in the US. Of course, Ron is an expert in this. He's helped a bunch of SaaS companies and in terms of marketing to DTC brands in US. And in today's podcast, we'll talk about his experiences, what has worked, what has not worked. Yeah, so great to have you, Ron. And why don't we start with a brief, a few case studies about some of the successful companies that came to you and then now have successfully created their mark in DTC brands.
Yeah, absolutely. We've worked with incredible companies. Some like Tapcart, which is a nine-figure mobile commerce enablement company. Elevar, which is a server-to-server tracking company that's worked with us for quite some time. Open Border, which is making international enablement possible, international sales through your D2C website. You have Stay AI, which is a subscription company. Parker, which is a D2C credit card company. Plastic, which is a payment tool. We've worked with over 50 plus SaaS companies till date now. We've been able to grow Chew on this really well through the formats of using podcast, newsletter, introductions, and events to formalize the gateway media connections.
Got it. Awesome. Thanks, Ron, for sharing that. So, in your opinion, what are some of the things that most SaaS companies don't get about DTC brands, and especially marketing to the DTC brands?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece, right, is when you're selling your tool, um, when you're building your tool, you believe that everyone's going to understand the work, the effort you put into building your tool, and it's going to be easy to just get. It's going to be common sense for a founder to know, and it's quite the opposite. There's so many tools, there's so many things out there that I think a lot of SaaS companies, they put their head down building the product, but they never put their head up to look around and say, do we have the right messaging, the right marketing? Are we going to go after the right ICP, and what does the ICP care about? How are we going to solve a problem and be more customized to our outreach message? And I think a lot of assumption goes into, what, I've spent millions in building this product. Marketing's going to be easy. And I think that's the one biggest thing I see very often. Number two, I think, is just in general, there isn't a good examples of there aren't good examples of um, SaaS companies listening to brands. It's more about hey, here's my product, go ahead and use it or demo it or try it. But you don't really, I've only seen a few companies really listen to what the brand has a problem around and say, hey, I see that you may be struggling with this. I've created this, it's similar to this, and here's why I believe I'm a better service or a tool to solve this problem you're having. And if you can talk like that, I think you don't need a middleman like us. What we really are is we're a middleman that serves between a brand and a SaaS company because we understand what a brand needs to hear, but we also understand what a SaaS is trying to say. And I think that's important.
I think this has been one thing that resonated very deeply even when we first met back in New York. Um, yeah, and I think some of the tips that you shared were extremely, extremely like invaluable. I think And simple things like just having a website that appeals to the audience is in itself such a big deal. And a lot of SaaS companies, they focus too much on product and don't really focus enough on the messaging that they give and how they are presenting and packaging themselves. And I think those messages were invaluable. But like in some of your experience, what are some of the strategies that have worked and some of the lessons learned through these experiences?
Yeah, I think it really really comes down to, in my opinion, where you are with your SaaS company, right? I think I'll go through a list of kind of what we do. So we believe that, influencers, if you do it right, there's influencer marketing where you can get certain people who have access to brands, get involved and make it worth their time. You have paid marketing where you can take certain paid resources or good content and run it as ads across platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. You have social media marketing, which is like, I believe if you're a SaaS founder, I don't care if you, um, don't really, or are camera shy. I don't care if you can't really speak English. I don't care about any of it. You have to be on social media, right? You as a founder, not just your company or whatnot. You as a founder need to be out there because nobody cares about the product and no one knows enough like you. And even if you try to hire someone who's good at social media, it doesn't matter. They're not going to be able to do the job you will in the beginning stages. Then you can do dinners, right? Which has been a huge unlock where, we're curating rooms of 40, 50 founders. And it's great. Um, but we get sponsors who want to be in that same room. We'll charge them, but that money, if you spend it right, you get access to 40, 50 brands. If you're good at, conversating and networking, you can meet at least 10, 15, 20 brands that night. And if you think about it, where else are you going to get the access to even 15, 20 brands where you can shake their hands and talk about your product? And this is where coming and understanding why is very important, right? You don't want to just talk about the product. You want to understand what their issue is, what they're dealing with. And even if you don't get around to talking about the product, you can always follow up and say, hey, I knew you had this issue. I created something around it, right? So dinners have been really, really good for that one on one. We really believe in podcasts and newsletters as a great media outlet. Um, I think there's some stat like 42% of all D2C brand owners are learning and receiving media through a podcast or newsletter now, which is really, really big. And so double down on that, right? If you have to sponsor a podcast to get into the right audience, that's great. If you think about it, Chew on This, we get 10 to 20,000 views or downloads per episode. And the people who are watching our stuff is all founders, right? Why would you really watch our content if you're not a founder or thinking about being a founder? So if you get direct access to stuff like that, it's great. Same thing with newsletter, right? A newsletter like ours, we have 25,000 subscribers. It's important for people to recognize, we can talk about you and get right in front of the right customer. Now, if your pitch is, hey, if you're looking for XYZ, download this or book a demo here, of course it's not going to work. But if you solve and tell stories or you solve an issue, like a lot of the people who sponsor our newsletter will tell them, talk about a story. Tell us about a story where you made an impact. Don't give me a case study link. Tell me about a shortened version. A good way to kind of go about it is if I tell you in 15 seconds, sum up all your case studies to me, right? And you have no choice. In 15 seconds, tell me about your most important case study, right? How would you talk about that case study? You're gonna get right to the numbers. You're gonna tell me who it is. You're gonna tell me what you did, right? And so I think again, newsletters and these type of sponsorships they force you to get the point across, show impact, and then get the right funnel moving. Events, conferences have been huge. There's D2C dinners, but then there's events and conferences where, again, I don't believe you have to spend money on a booth. I think it's a waste of money. But getting tickets and going to the conferences, booking dinners and inviting people who are at the conferences, those things aren't a waste of money because it shows high intent. And then last few things, I think there's a really strong community, right? From for forums, Facebook groups, Slack channels, e-commerce fuel, where if you inject yourself well or use a good media company that has good presence and all those things, it's really powerful what can come out of that. It's really, really strong. So Yeah, those are some of the strategies that we've seen work really well.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing those gems, Ron, for the audience. And actually, I wanted to double click on a few of these and wanted to discuss in further depth. Tell us, like, what do you think are the importance of storytelling and brand narrative, and how should founders think about it, especially considering that most of the SaaS founders are engineers, right? Who
Yep.
understand maths very well, very well, but
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the way I position it to everyone was, let's say I told you that you had to sell your product, but you can never hire anyone in sales and marketing. How would you go about it, right? You would learn a little bit. You would probably try and go and emulate some people. You would try and figure out what is your best strengths. And I think that's the way it needs to start. I don't think you'll learn how to story tell or message the right context till you try what's working, what's not. Like for example, when we started working with the team over at Open Border, Darwish, who is the founder, wasn't really out there socially. He was a very very smart kind of engineer, product builder, D2C brand owner, but didn't care to be out there in the social space. And we did good growth for them, but where we unlocked a lot of growth was when he started posting on LinkedIn and Twitter. And although it wasn't like super fun and exciting stuff, he posted a lot of intellectual content, and people started receiving it, liking it, enjoying it. And now people know, oh, Open Border, cool. Is that Darvish? Oh, I've seen his content, right? And people start to build trust. So I don't think it has to be necessarily storytelling. If you're an engineer or you're a coder and you believe you just have deep, deep product knowledge, then go find that niche and talk about it. I think the problem really is a lot of people just don't feel comfortable to get started, and that's the problem with a lot of things, right? Oh, I don't want to get started because I don't know if it's going to work, or I only may get one like. And it's less about likes and impressions and all that, and more about getting into a routine, and that's when you really start to build that consistency.
great. Thanks for sharing that, Ron. And um, so tell us, like, you talked about influencer marketing, and I think yes, the one major fear that most of the SaaS founders have is they feel either shy in talking about things on social media, or they don't see enough ROI, especially early on, and they give up too early. Um, have you seen any anecdotes that you can share around like founders that have overcome them?
I think there is quite a few where the issue was a lot of people don't couldn't find time to be consistent. Because if you're writing content, especially written content, it takes time, right? You have to come up with the content, you have to create the messaging, you have to make a hook, you have to. There's so many elements you have to add to this, um, that if you do it once, you're like, oh man, that took me an hour to write. Like I don't have an hour every day to write a post. And I think one of the ways that I've seen a lot of people overcome it is doing things in batched work. Like, when we post on Instagram for our brands, D2C brands, right? We don't come up with the post every day and say, here's what I'm going to post on Instagram today, right? You have a content calendar, and you create the content maybe a week in advance and you get it all scheduled out, right? The same tools are available to us, right? We should be creating content in batches, not daily. I think it's very overwhelming to think every day you need to do something that's uncomfortable. Instead, if you did it every week, right, you would get over the uncomfortableness after a certain point. But I think that's the way we've been able to get a lot of people over it, was moving towards a content calendar, batching the content and doing it at a week at a time, and getting 3 to 5 pieces of content written. And it's grueling amount of work. But where I've seen most people struggle is they'll start something, but then realize they don't want to do it every day because they don't enjoy it. And I think that just doesn't work.
Understood. Um, yeah, and I also like wanted to quickly touch upon this cultural nuances in marketing. Like, what are the differences in marketing strategies for a US market versus for emerging markets? And like, how do you, how would you recommend founders adapt their messaging and branding for US?
When you say that, are you talking about more in like how to get a overseas SaaS to adapt to US, or just in general?
Yeah, I mean, how to get a India-based SaaS company, because that's the
Yeah.
audience that we are talking about, for them to tweak their messaging for US brands.
Yeah. Um, it's interesting. I think there's a few very important ways. Number one is I do believe you need to have some sort of connection or presence or affiliate or team or freelancer that is connected to the US economy, right? So, like, when I say economy, I'm talking about like the entire ecosystem of Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. Because I think without that, you're always going to play catch up alone, right? So investing in somebody that is either going to be your, again, you can be your content creator, can be your social media manager, whatever it is, to keep in touch with the world. Because I don't think the messaging has to tweak that much. I think you need to speak to the right audience. I think when you're building something in India, your audience naturally is just going to be locality, right? And India being, whatever, second, third largest country in the world, um, it's very tough to get out of it, right? Because you can't just go and change your algorithm. Like for me, um, when I'm looking up examples for collagen ads, okay, I'll go on my TikTok and I'll search collagen in US, and within like a few hours, my algorithm has adapted towards me seeing collagen in the US, right? It's not like it doesn't, it's not too hard. But I think when you're trying to go and change your feed and change your ecosystem on LinkedIn, Twitter, and all the platforms you're using, you're probably drowned in just India, right? Like you may try to go and make this activation towards, I want to get in front of more US brands. So I'm going to go and like this and comment this and do that and do that. But you may still not get out of the ecosystem, which is India, because it's so large. So I think having some sort of US presence, whether it's through a person, an entity, a an agency, a service from a media, whatever it may be, I think you need something there to plant your seed. Then from there, I believe, again, I don't think the way you guys message things are much different from how US needs to hear it. I think it's just about understanding that we don't take a lot of things at face value. So even though you may be like, I think a lot of like international SaaS, they assume more than American SaaS. And what I mean by that is I think American SaaS, they don't go into a demo or meeting thinking you should know this because you're a brand founder. They go into it and they start bare bones from scratch all the time, everyone. And I think that is something in the mentality of Indians or in general international is, oh, I'm gonna go very fast through this because you should know this, right? And the truth is, a lot of people don't know this, and I think that's where we need to change. Is probably when we're actually speaking to people, when we're actually talking about it, is don't assume that because the brand is even $1 million brand or $5 million brand that they know what they're doing, and that you can just skip to you know get right to business. Um, so I think that's where it needs to change. Is I think Indian SaaS and international SaaS companies, they need to start with asking more questions and understand each person's problem rather than I had I think I had spoke to maybe one you referred or somebody else referred to me, and even though I'm not a customer, I'm there to help. I always look at when someone talks to me about their company, right? Especially like an Indian one, if they jump right into the product or they get to understand me a little bit too. And I remember, many of the calls I have with, let's say, an Indian SaaS or international SaaS, they'll jump right in to the product. They'll jump right into the demo. They'll go right into like, yeah, so okay, let me show you what we've built. And they're very proud, which is good. But the thing is how do you know that I care about this if you didn't ask me anything? If you don't talk to me, if you don't hear me. So if you have a 30-minute demo, spend at least 10, 12 minutes listening to the other person, because that's when I'll know that you're going to direct things towards me. So long answer, but I think few of those elements are important.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, great takeaways. One, listen. Two, dumb it down and don't talk a lot of nerd geek stuff. And I think one other thing that I've also seen, especially when it comes to pricing conversations, is that most American brands, they prefer to have straight conversations instead of beating around the bush. That's another note I would say that I would add. But I think these are very, very interesting points. I also wanted to quickly double down on founder dinners, Ron. So, I mean, we went to New York and we hosted one of the founder dinners with you, and I think this was such a great gathering, and it helped us not just like meet a few initial potential, I would say, design partners, but also I think it helped test the positioning very easy, very, very easily. And I think the that was one of the best takeaways, especially for a young SaaS founder trying to build this product. It's first and foremost super important to understand the problem and how you're
Yes.
packaging that problem and the messaging to your audience. So
Right.
positioning that is also super, super critical. And I think having this, there's there's no better feedback loop than an in-person meeting, and especially in an intimate gathering like which was one of which was hosted by Chu on this, was just incredible.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think you said a lot of things that are important there is like, access to design partners if you're especially early stage, very important. Um, but more importantly, I think the most important piece is if you have even 3 to 4 real conversations that can go back and help you position your product better, you rather do that and spend a little money now than roll out something and learn that through churn. I think a lot of people don't realize in SaaS, churn is inevitable because technology is on hockey stick rollout, right? Like a hockey stick growth in terms of rollout. And so you're naturally just going to have churn. I think the problem that I see a lot of people not solving more for is how much can I learn about my product before the product teaches me on its own. And the product always teaches you what you need to learn through obviously negative reviews, poor feedback, or churn. And I think that's one of the most expensive ways to learn, because when you look at the acquisition costs to acquire that customer, the time put in to keep that customer happy, and then think about all of the negative, because the power of 10 is very true, where if one negative thing happens, 10 other people are going to know. Okay. So if you think about the cost of now 10 other potential people getting affected, um, the cost of all of that together is far higher than you going to an event or a dinner, paying $5,000 to sponsor it, and learning all of those potential downfalls or potential things you need to change or potential things you need to keep, um, before you learn it from a company. So I feel like we don't talk about that enough. It's super, super important. And then I think it's just really important for people to have some sort of reference point of who you are. Like, I know kim.cc, right? Like, you guys are obviously not based here. You don't have presence here that much, right? And there's events happening all the time. But what happens is if you can even do it one a quarter or one every few months, right? What is important is staying relevant.
Yeah,
Um, and I think there's a power to relevancy that has no ROI. Okay. Like just staying relevant sometimes has no ROI. But it is important in the roots of many, many discussions and questions and learnings that you have. Um, and I just think that, people need to think of it less as, oh, did I go and get 10 demos and 5 meetings and 2 convert? Okay, compared to my acquisition cost, I'm only loss of 3K, right? Instead of five. If you look at it like that, then I don't think dinners are only like are for you for the long term. I think you should do some, right? Get your ROI. But I think dinners and events are for the people who know they need to stay relevant, who want to come and learn, bring the right team to learn, and then on the way make deeper rooted connections. Because even if one brand is not a fit for you, if you can make a deep connection with that person and they believe in the product, there's power of 10 is very true, right? You can find a way to get them to tell 10 more people.
Yeah. So one, stay relevant. Two, you build strong connections, and especially in early stage, it is these connections that make a huge difference. Because invariably, the brands are taking a bet on you. There is no product, or at least nothing that has resonated yet, but it is you, your pitch that resonates with the brand. So that's a great takeaway. I think on the
Absolutely.
first point which you mentioned, which is also super interesting, that you get to iterate instead of iterating your product. The point that you talked about, doing iterations on the product. I think clearly the fastest way to iterate is to iterate on messaging, not the product. The amount of engineering resource people spend on just iterating on the product and getting lost is just insane. But it's
It
much
is.
faster to iterate on messaging, and the best way to do that is just be amongst your customers.
Yeah, you nailed it. I think that part is just so important. And sometimes people give up too early, but don't realize it's just a shift that needs to happen, right? Not anything else. And I couldn't agree more with that.
Awesome. So the other thing that we also wanted to quickly touch upon is you mentioned early on that some of the founders can actually benefit from warm introductions through networks, and I think that is super important, especially if you are an international SaaS company not based in US, and if you don't have an investor that is based locally. Typically, it's tough for you to get the initial few introductions through these warm networks. But I think uh, meeting people through these founder dinners, or through people like you who introduce them to other DTC brands, can be actually a great way to build that initial network and build the initial degree of trust. Because at the end of it, if the only way to get the first few clients is through trust, and later on, as you start to grow, people really rely on who has talked about you, right? And is there someone in their network that talked about you? And I think recently we signed up one design partner, Andy Swims, and they're also like one of the biggest reasons that Ashley actually worked with us was because she had heard about us through through the network, through Jess, and it just quickly helped her build trust with us and get started. Of course, resonated with her. But one of the most important reasons she took the leap was because she heard about us through one of their warm networks, and it just helped build the connection.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned there is just so important because it's like so much of what we do on our network, especially the founder network, it's heavily being built off trust and deeper each day. It's just getting deeper and deeper, deeper rooted on trust. And if you don't have people who you can rely on or that can be your gateway of trust, then I think founders can see through that. And I think it's very important to, initially be very, very conscious and not greedy. And I love the word design partners or MVP or beta because it's showing that you're not perfect,
Yeah.
right? It's showing that you need to work on this. I've come across a few SaaS companies that are very new and young that are in that stage, but they also love the greed of signing on some clients to start building MRR way too early. And we've seen these companies have to take one step forward only to take two steps back. And so I think utilizing the network for the different time your company is whatever time your company is in, like whatever stage, is the right way to access people. Like you said, like you came to the event that you hosted with us, um, found a few design partners, maybe found some people who could be good, but not right now. Found some people who were good for learning, etc. I think that's the perfect way to take advantage of what stage kim.cc was in, right? Um, Versus, I think a company that is maybe now looking for demos, right? Because they've started to roll out their product. They, have maybe 5, 10 paying clients. I think the way they have to approach it is, who can they build a really good relationship with? Who are those few people? Whether they're agency owners, affiliates, brand owners, um, can be, just partnership people, that where they can say, hey, listen, I know you have authority and trust. I want to use you as a gateway. I will pay you for your time and make it valuable, but I want to use you as a gateway, right? Um, and I think that's really, really important, because most of the people I talk to, I can make an intro now very quickly, because they know I'm going to vet something out myself before I make that intro. If that trust is built, and I think brands and SaaS companies equally recognize the people who can do that.
Awesome. Finally, I also wanted to talk about like another point that you mentioned, which is building an online community. Have you seen case studies of something like this working for other brands, and if you could share some examples?
Yeah, I think community is a tricky one, only because well, it's tricky in the sense of finding the right time to build it is the most important piece. I think it's very, very necessary. Okay. You look at the community that Tapcart's built with Untapped, or what Parker has built with the Parker Club, or you look at the community Get Repeat built before their product kind of went downhill, or what Limited Supply did with their podcast and create a Slack group. There are some really, really strong communities out there. E-commerce Fuel, Andrew Foxwell's group, right? There's so many. Um, but you can't go and create a community when you don't have enough to offer. Okay. So I believe you should all every single SaaS founder should have an idea that one day they have to create a community. Okay. If you're building your business, you have to create one. Even you guys, you're gonna need one. Okay. Now, when do you do it, or how do you recognize it's time, is when you've built a strong enough network that wants more from you. Okay. So why did Tapcart create Untapped? Because they wanted their customers to exchange what's working with each other. Why did Limited Supply create the Slack chat? They wanted to have a place where Nick and Moise can be asked questions and they can answer them directly in a chat instead of on YouTube comments. Why did Get Repeat create a huge, CPG house and community? Was they wanted the ability for people to learn from each other about retention. So when you think about the purpose, it's always to deliver, obviously, value. But I think all of them started at the right time when they had derived enough sense of um, customers or users and whatnot. So yes, I think you absolutely need it, but I think there's a time and place so that you don't come off pretentious either, right? Because community does have a little bit of responsibility, and it's important to recognize that.
Awesome. So we talked about a bunch of things. We talked about in-person meetings, from founder dinners, events, conferences. We talked about warm introductions, newsletters, podcasts, influencer marketing. Tell us, how can Chew on this help in this journey for SaaS
Yeah,
company?
absolutely. So chew on this. We own our own media through our newsletter, podcasts, our events company. We also do a lot of social postings. We also do a lot of resource creation, so creating guides and PDFs and stuff. But the way I think we work is, if you're a SaaS company that believes you have a great product, but not have enough strength in the sales and marketing function, um, we can be that voice in the US for you, right? We can be that voice. Even if you're not international and you're just, a US based SaaS, we believe we understand how to speak to founders. We understand how to get in front of brands. The only thing that is important for us is we ourselves like to try the product, and we have to get behind the product. We do not just go in just because you want to maybe work with you on this. If I don't believe in your product, or I can't use it, or I don't understand how it works, I no matter if you're spending $500,000 with me, I won't take the money. So I think we're really, really intentional, and we really care about the ecosystem. So we try to find ways to bring founders and SaaS companies closer together.
That's great to hear, Ron, and I think that this brings us to the close of our podcast on how SaaS companies can market to DTC brands in the US. Thanks everyone for joining in, and thanks, Ron, for an amazing session.
Absolutely. It's my first one talking about Chew on this. And so it was an honor to be on, and hopefully we can be valuable to some of the people building.
Awesome, great, thanks, Ron.